All right, good afternoon. My name is Carl Chesser.
And I'm Cornel Codrea.
And this is the power of pranks. In this talk, we're going to be going over three main sections. One is the why, which will explain some of the power that we've discovered through pranks, especially pranks in the corporate environment. The second area will be rules. So without rules or constraints, you could be unsafe when applying pranks. So we're going to cover some of these rules. So if you're curious about applying pranks, you have some constraints. And the last piece of this is we're going to be going over the empirical study, which is proof, evidence that we've witnessed at Cerner in a very long-range study, which goes over many years, that we've witnessed how pranks have been applied and the effect they applied against the workforce. So the power. One of the big things we started noticing that was a lot of large drivers in the corporate environment was how are their associates happy? How and why is someone being happy? And these are very hard things to determine what influence happiness. Everyone's different. There's both internal and external factors that dictate happiness. So we started getting quite a bit of curiosity of what makes people happy and what could things do to be applied to someone to make someone happy, such as pranks. This thought came about 12 years ago at Cerner. Both Cornel and I got to know each other that time, and we started figuring out what can pranks be done at Cerner to change the culture and change how people act and behave to actually increase or improve happiness. As many of you may know, that there's a lot of negative forces out there in the environment. As engineers, you have to deal with a lot of things. Those negative forces are continuously bringing you down. If you look in this picture, there are several little things to be pointed out. In the upper left is production. There's always production fires, and they come at completely unplanned times. So if you think of yourself as an innocent creature in some environment, you're always in this worry state that production will blow up and you will be in pain. There's also the lower left. There's someone always asking for an obligation. When can you have this done for me? I need a deadline. Predict the future, even though you don't have a time machine. These type of demands are tons of negative pressures all the time that you're I can't give you a real answer because I want to give a true answer. Another problem that we deal with is the upper right. That's just the software we build. Many times we try to take our thoughts and put in code, and then for some odd reason the compiler doesn't honor what we think should happen. The software doesn't work as expected, and we get defects. And lastly is we have to deal with this thing called computers. We hate computers. These things all the time are supposed to be reliable state machines, but they're not. We get solar flares or weird rays that hit these machines, and they act sporadic. Power doesn't work all the time, and for whatever reason, they're unpredictable, and therefore that puts stress on us. That puts stress on you every day, even though you want this safe environment. So with these negative forces, in our pursuit of how can we get happiness, we started looking across broadly and realized that this is not just a common or an uncommon trend that we were thinking of. This is actually more broad. Companies are starting to think more and more about happiness. There's actually people with a title of a chief happiness officer. Their job is to think about how can my associates be happy? How can I improve happiness? How can I make sure people are doing things that actually improve happiness versus degrade their quality? And now it's because they notice that if people are happier, they actually are more productive. So this is kind of a little bit of a backwards thought. Many times people think, well, if I can get Billy to be more productive, Billy will get more things, and then he'll be happy. When the inverse should actually be occurring, where if I could get Billy happy, he might actually be productive for once. The other piece is if they notice that people are happy, there are safer environments. Billy isn't disgruntled and kicking things all the time. It's a safer environment, which means people are happier and safer overall. So this became much more than just I like to have a nice, happy environment to come to. It became much more around economics. I need to have a business that scales. I need safer environments. I need better things. I need people to be happy to do that. I can't have people to be unhappy. So taking from a corporate sense, look even more broadly. Countries are now considering this as a very strong indicator. Versus gross domestic product, we're now looking at gross national happiness. How happy are people overall in the country? That dictates total quality of life. That dictates if people are going to get upset, they're going to key your car, they're going to burn down government buildings. It dictates a lot of different types of influences. There's also reports. Every year, there's actual Happiness Day that they release a report of the World Happiness Report. This is something that kind of gives that very indicator, how are all these countries feeling and how happy are they? Because that's dictating other things, because happiness is the real indicator of a lot of these important factors. So, we looked at happiness, and we know that this is a very important indicator that drives change in a corporate environment as well as worldwide. We also were curious about how can pranks change that? And we realized that pranks have a lot of elements to happiness. So when we started thinking about pranks, we started thinking about, well, pranks actually have you engage many more things in your mind. You engage more things in your brain of creativity to apply a prank. That's because of the constraints many times you may have to do on a prank. To do this prank on Bill in the upper right, he may be thinking, well, he only has a very confined environment of where he sits at. Or I only have these many resources. I only have this paper and a few paper clips to try this out. You have to figure out what you can do to do a prank, as well as be conservative. Most pranks, as you'll see in our study, reused and recycled materials, which means they had to come up with a new idea to make it a unique prank, so Bill would not somehow be able to forecast what's going to happen to him, but also reuse materials just to conserve elements. Another thing we noticed about pranks that actually have improved happiness was that they are usually done from a team. So besides one actor applying this, it was a larger group. And by what we're seeing through team action, when people serve and act together in a physical sense, they actually became increased bonds of relationship. So they actually, by doing teamwork, they became happier because they got to know everyone else better and when they were applying that prank to Bill, like we talked about in the earlier example. Another thing about pranks is that they have an element of surprise, which also improves happiness. Since the primary focus of this study was on humans, we realized humans have this innate just love of happy surprises. And one kind of example that came to mind was that through happiness, we've noticed that Steve Jobs, we kind of had a little reference earlier in the keynote, was great about delivering surprises. Many times when they would be talking about all these great things that be happening at Apple, you think, wow, that's a lot of great stuff. And then you'd say, oh, and there's one more thing. And then deliver this massive other great thing that was coming out from the company. People were greatly excited, and that happiness and anticipation improved happiness even more. The other thing is some of a negative factor to combat. People do not like to be forgotten. To be forgotten is somewhat partially dying inside. So we realized that people do never like to have this thing happen. And in the corporate environment, people leave, move on to different things, and then come back. When they come back and have a sense of being forgotten, they're hurt. And that actually hurts, that negative type of force actually hurts their ability to be happy. So in this case, well, we could have where everyone's welcoming you back. There's a large parade when Bill returns back to the office. Everyone's happy he's returned. And group stories. These are really strong connective bonds. We talked about doing it through a team activity of doing a prank to someone else, but there's those really personal stories. Many times you probably don't sit around, maybe sometimes you do, in the after hours to have a happy hour and talk about things at work. It isn't all about, you remember that one time you debugged that code and you had to go to the second line to breakpoint? Wasn't that great? Like, it's usually about something you did together. You remember when we did that prank and we put that big vat of oil up top of the building or something like that? Like, those things really resemble and go beyond the bounds of what we usually perceive. These are large, tangible things that you remember because you served together and you did something that you all remember as a result. Now, as we brought up, there's different factors that will improve happiness. Those are all components that we notice about happiness. But this also changes the bonds of what we found between people. When we noticed these people doing these type of activities, we noted another force that was kind of coming around, which was camaraderie. Camaraderie, when we kind of looked about this, usually I felt like it was associated to more of the military background because people are putting in very undesirable environments, asked to do undesirable things. They had to actually go beyond what they thought they could do before and had to build bonds with each other to do it. This photo I thought was a great photo, just kind of looking around. I don't know any of the individuals in this photo, but you can tell they have camaraderie. The environment they're at, the building doesn't look so good. I don't know what kind of structure that is in the back, probably the right that's holding the building up, but they're all sitting in the middle here. The guy in the middle is uncontrollably laughing. The guy to the left doesn't know why he's really there, but he's part of the group. He's going to be part of it. The guy, I think in the lower right, might be blacked out. He's in a headlock move. But you could tell these guys they'll do anything for each other. No matter what those negative forces are happening, camaraderie is going to help them move on to the next realm of whatever problems happen. What software may bring, whatever happens, they're going to stick together and still produce positive results. So as we brought up, camaraderie is a great means of self-defense against those awful, nasty, negative forces that we talked about earlier. So on this next part, I'm going to hand it off to Cornel, and he's going to go a little bit beyond just what we noticed from a high-level perspective, but actually putting data to associate this.
So some of you might say, that all sounds really good, but where's the scientific proof? For those of you who are healthy skeptics, we put together some numbers. When we plotted the 32 recorded pranks against the stock performance, we noticed an interesting pattern. The years that we had more pranks applied, our stock shot up, and then the years that pranks went down, our stock went down. So could there be a correlation, we wonder, between the number of pranks and the stock's performance? We hired renowned Dr. Norman Knudsen from the Nordic Institute of Numbers and Science stuff. His verdict: science stuff proves that pranked associates were more productive, and that caused Cerner stock to go up. So there you have it, proof. Over the 12-year course of the study, we're able to infer 6 broad rules to pranking. If you are a novice prankster, or if you're experienced, this would be a good reminder or just broad guidelines on how to prank. So we all know that scarcity of resource makes it more precious. It's the same with pranks, so apply occasionally. Also, you avoid the peers thinking, that Carl, all he does all day is prank people. Majority of pranks were timed to coincide with an associate's return from a long vacation or a sabbatical. To Carl's previous slide that he had there, people want to know that they were missed. And that's a big part of why these pranks are applied. So we all love our HR department. I'm assuming we have some representatives here. But if you anticipate them being involved in the after effects of a prank, you probably come up with a new idea. Same goes for lawyers. Well, we probably don't love lawyers, but still we don't want them involved. Another one that I'd like to add, even though it's not there, is properties. So before planning a prank, ask yourself a couple of questions. Will it leak? Will it set the fire alarm? Will it cause unpleasant smells? If the answer is yes to any of these 3, again, a bad idea. So while prank shows the associates who was gone that they were missed, think of pranks also as a great opportunity to do some team building. As Carl stated earlier, the team can develop and exercise their communal creative process. This is actually the next one over here. It's an extension to the previous principle. Find a time that the whole team can participate. This time will allow everyone to focus on the pranks, forget about all the other things that they have going on in their lives. Another thing is, if you give your team a whole day to work on a prank, they might just do that. So this may cause some issue with appearance of productivity or lack thereof in your team. The next one is really get to know your audience. The prank should be tied in somehow with the associate that you're pranking. Maybe connect their activity while on vacation or their sabbatical. Maybe their pet peeves. We'll show you later on some of the examples that we've had here at Cerner. It's also important to know the boundaries of what could make an associate unhappy. We don't want the prank to backfire. So, next section of this talk, we're going to actually show you some pranks. But before we get to the pranks, I'd like to introduce you to a very special Cerner associate. Actually, he's not here today. His name is George Swinehart. Has anybody met George Swinehart? We haven't either, actually, even though he's been at Cerner for at least 12 years. The prank that we studied took place in different teams and different organizations, but they all had something in common, and that is the involvement of George Swinehart. So, while none of us met him, there's ample evidence that he exists, and he has a lot of involvement in the pranks community. To give you an example, what you're seeing there is the All About Me robot newsletter. Has anybody remember seeing these on the hallways? So this was a newsletter that we used to have on the old Innovations, the Realization building, and that introduced us to an associate every week. And there's something interesting about them. So we spotted this, and we decided to take a photo of it several years ago. And we also got to know a little bit about George Swinehart. We found something interesting about him, and apparently as a child he was accidentally left with a pack of mountain gorillas, nurtured for a week and until biologists mistakenly tranquilized them. So that might have something to do with his desire to prank people. Besides that, he's also an active user of a certain wiki, and we were able to find him on a floor seating chart. As you can see right there, he used to sit on yellow 7. Again, we haven't been able to meet him in person, but another proof of evidence was actually outside of Cerner. Carl's wife was looking through their wedding guests, and the very first person there that signed their wedding guest was George Swinehart. A bit of a surprise there, probably.
It was. Being at this very close family event, and it was quite confusing when we looked at the photos. We could not spot anyone who did not look like part of the family, yet this is my wedding guest book.
Oh. Anyway, so... So we're going to move on to the actual pranks over here. We picked just a handful of the 32 pranks, and we're going to show you, what people have done here at Cerner. Carl?
Yeah. So as Cornel brought up, the primary focus is around George Swinehart, how he's being tied to all these pranks, but these are what we also observed. This first prank that we observed, there's a timeline in the upper left if you're curious about the chronological order of these events. This first one was in Chrissy Ackerson's. At this time in the this was 3001 back at World Headquarters, had an office cube. This was fully arranged with toilet paper on pretty much all of the surroundings. What made this difficult is that though it seems quite easy to clean up, it was completely saran wrapped as well to all the materials. So it looks inviting to take off, but not so easy to remove. Another one is what we notice and identifies as a water cup cube. This was a previous associate. In her area, there was many small cups of water that we noticed. In there, you can probably zoom in a little bit, and cups were filled with water only halfway full. And this kind of hits on what Cornel mentioned earlier about not including properties. Someone also took some good care noticing that this would be a lot of water stacked up on many cups. This required the associate actually had to take very delicate care to get back into their workplace, therefore making a path back by emptying every one of those cups.
And this is a common theme that we notice with pranks. A lot of pranks require the associate to do certain clearing of the prank itself to get to their seating or to be able to to start working at their desks.
Right. So all of them came to where they actually blocked the associate, to where they could not actually just simply ignore it. This next one actually was applied on Cornell. Cornell's area, this quite seems like a hazard, all the yellow tape, so anyone of any curiosity would probably say stay away from there is probably a biohazard. But there's also something else that's odd about this photo. If you notice on the timeline, this was back in 2007, so a decade ago. Does anyone know what's on the lower left?
You mean that strange electronic device looking there?
That's what computers used to look like. And when we actually did the study at that time and collected, we tried to understand, was that part of the prank? But that was actually a computer dedicated to support a wiki for the team.
Yeah, it ran our team's wiki.
So infrastructure, right close area, and that was a machine. Those are called computers. So this one is what we call the box cube. Now what we noticed about the box cube, it also observed another important piece of the puzzle, was that they reused materials. At this time, at Realization Campus, a move was ongoing, so many of these boxes were located in the area. They had therefore stacked all the boxes to where they had to remove a lot of those to get access back to their desks to be productive.
Two principles here, besides the reuse of materials around. The other one, from a safety perspective, these are all empty boxes. So I think it was safe from the second rule of avoiding lawyers.
Right. Yep. The next one was the gift cube. So this one was, if you're not familiar with these type of layouts, it was another considered office cubicle. So it had a full surrounding walls, but a door to enter in. This cubicle was therefore arranged as a large present for the associate when they returned. This is for Lei Han. As you notice, there was a nice decorative pattern of both red and green to symbolize the Christmas time that everyone was happy for. There's also some additional decorations. If you notice to the right, there were stars on all over that office cubicle of messages that people left. One of them was from a previous target of a prank, was Chrissy Ackerson, mentioning, I had nothing to do with this. So that made clear evidence that she was not part of this at all. Another one was Ryan Hamilton signing that. I don't know, I think that was Chinese, or his attempt to write Chinese. A piece of this cube is that it was fully wrapped around so that the entrance of the door was not available. This also tested the cognitive abilities of the associate returning if they could find the door where it used to be. The next one is what we labeled the lawn cube. The lawn cube was one where, again, a similar layout, an office cubicle, but it had an actual full sod layout on the floor. One of the rules that were observed in this that was consistent was that there was a tarp laid down before that to ensure that both dirt, moisture, and insects were not getting into the actual carpentry of the area. Another thing we noticed is that it also had a pleasant environment. So there was nice lawn, there's garden gnomes, characters sitting around there, as well as nice lawn furniture to sit in. It was quite welcoming to actually go towards it. So a piece that is also, you can see some more nice items around there, a nice thermometer in the corner. Remind you, it's outside and it's comfortable. Another important piece of this prank was that due to the depth of it, requiring sod and a lot of actual moving in of materials, we did not actually affect with properties. So this actually where an associate was willing to take that sod back and use it in their own property afterwards because they needed to use some sod at home. We don't have proof of this, but we believe that sod is still alive today and supporting his whole backyard. The next one is considered the wall cube. The wall cube was where we had these large things that were called filing cabinets. This is where you store paper documents, things that were before the digital age. These filing cabinets, if you can't notice because they blend in quite well, is there's two of them stacked together, and then of course a nice welcoming sign, but using a little play on words called welcome back to Shahzad. Shahzad Safar had to actually get back into his cube by going past these walls. Now what's not very clear from this picture is that to gain access, there was a small entry door at the bottom. The importance of this is that since it did not really appear to be an easy way to enter, there was clear signage. Enter at your own risk. So therefore, absolve all type of risk, knowing that. Inside there is another repeat. For those who are not familiar, those are actual files, paper. They're called ITN folders. We used to actually track a lot of important project work. They were strewn across the floor inside that area. Another prank, what we found, was called the water balloon cube. This is consistent with how we did for safety and properties. We noticed how there was a tarp laid down the bottom to actually capture any type of moisture or water lost from the balloon vessels. As you can see, there's actually quite a lot of water balloons in that area. It may be hard to see from the depth, but over hundreds of water balloons existed, requiring the associate to actually empty each one of these. This was on Kurt Fulcher's cube area, so if some of you may know him, he takes an extended leave at the end of the year. This happened. One thing when we were documenting this, we noticed that something when the prank was applied earlier before he returned, several days earlier, and there was large questions of how long a water balloon can last. And so if you're curious, there's actual ways you can do prediction based off how much direct sunlight is hitting the water balloon, because that's what degrades the quality faster. And of course, in a very important piece, there's a nice message on his seat of "Have a nice day." The next one is the cage cube. If you're not familiar, sometimes when projects take direct and a lot of focus, there's a project or war room that we call it, that people all join in. In this case, this was for Robert Farr. He was working on iWare at the time. In this area, he had his kind of own space, but it was in a larger open area. Knowing how Robert works, we want to also protect other people from his aggressive ideas and projections. So we believe that's why an actual cage was framed. I don't know the gauge of the wire, but it looks like some nice chicken wire was used. If you can read, there's also signage. So don't feed the distinguished engineer, meaning don't tempt or feed things through the chicken wire because they may actually cause risk to the associates. Another part of this prank that we noticed was quite unique was that when the associate many times does not know this happens and then returns to their surprise, they were also invited about something else. They captured evidence when Robert returned back into the area. But what you may notice is that Robert's wearing different clothing than what we typically wear. He was asked to come back for an executive photo that never was going to occur. So Robert wore a suit to this. And we believe in our records that Robert went and bought a suit for this event. But I believe Robert has used that suit, and it's helped him quite a bit afterwards. Another one was the War Room Cube. This same War Room area also housed other associates. One of them, in this case, was Kevin Shackleton. Kevin had a dedicated area, if you can see in the upper left, where he had multiple external monitors, but he had no privacy. To therefore make him feel comfortable and not offend others in that area, we built another orange cube because they were in the orange area that we noticed that was observed from that case. So in this, it's hard to see, but inside there's many balloons, which is a welcoming case for that, as well as there was a window made for the other monitor in that, which also showed about knowing your audience. This meant they had care, understood that he cared about those monitors, and what we observed was that by having these 4 different window panes, Kevin later announced how that actually increases productivity because it made 4 monitors from 1. The Igloo Cube was one that we observed that happened on Jenny Said. Jenny, sitting in this area, was very sensitive to the cold air blasting down below onto her. So in this case, an actual igloo formed during her leave. And as you see, the icicles raining down from that top area. We may not notice is in the lower left, there's actual entrance, a small igloo door that they had to enter through. We believe that Jenny actually worked in this area for a while because the igloo actually helped protect her from the outer cold areas. The next one was the Swine Flu Cube. This was applied to me. If you're curious, for my honeymoon, we went to Mexico. It was during a time when the government announced, do not go to Mexico because there's a swine flu outbreak. But due to the lower prices and availability of great hotels, we decided to go. But of course, that put grave concern on our health and the risk of our possible future as humans. It was found when we came back that it was actually quarantined off, and those are very protective safety gloves to gain access. And another important piece to notice is that those swine flu items to the right were all handmade. little fluffy balls that looked like pigs were all inside here, which showed that the associates knew that this was a very time-staking thing to do. Another one was the trash can cube. Similar to the box cube, but we noticed it had another interesting element. This one, if you can't notice, has little stickies on every one of those trash cans. That identified where the trash can receptacle had to be returned when the associate came back. So therefore, to avoid waste buildup and actually imposing health concerns to the floor, Brugu had to go return these to everyone, offices, cubes, and conference rooms while meetings were occurring.
It was an opportunity to meet other people, so that was another benefit of it.
Right. I think it was observed that he had a great opportunity to be welcomed back from every associate on the floor. The next one was a rubber band monitor. This one we had noticed as it slowly started growing and gaining strength of more rubber bands. It's not documented anywhere of how many rubber bands you can put on a monitor until it breaks, but these are quite a few. Both the peripherals of the keyboard and monitor were covered, and though it does look quite intense and may fear the associate of how could I ever get these off, there was a nice balloon that said welcome back on the front of it. This next one, again, was on Jenny Said. This was a case where he noticed how corporate environments started changing to more open areas, open floor plans, no more cubicles. That required to where if a prank were to occur, they'd have to be suspended above the associate. So in this case, a balloon lattice. So balloons were hung from the ceiling all the way down, and therefore they required them to remove or get rid of these balloons to gain access back to the desk area. And of course, getting past all these balloons and popping them for quite some time. This next one was one of the most unique ones we had noticed was the Booby trap cube. From this, we noticed that this looks like a very classical prank. Desk area was therefore wrapped in a different material, so it has the aesthetics of, oh, there was a prank applied. So if you notice, this was on Shahzad Safar. His now monitor is covered in duct tape, all of his peripherals are covered in duct tape. But what was done for careful cases of not actually impacting anything was paper and plastic was wrapped before duct tape was applied. But however, this was not the prank. This was actually a distraction to the prank. So what was the prank was that when they would see this was, oh, there's duct tape and stuff on my desk. What we observed was that there was a fishing line tied to his chair, and that chair was tied to a rat trap. The rat trap had a funnel arm hooked to it that was full of flour. And then on the chair next to it actually had an air horn, so when he would sit, the air horn would go off. By having both applied, had good coverage of the prank. We'll now observe this prank being recorded. So this is Shahzad returning now. Though we don't have audio yet. Hopefully we can hear this. So Shahzad just got hit with that. Now there's going to be a case where he's observing what's going on, and we'll have a little slow-mo zoom in of this. And unfortunately, since we don't have audio, one of the next parts that's very critical with this is that there's the next piece of the prank that's going to occur. The air horn goes off, which of course, it goes something like this. Shahzad was not going to sit down because things were covered in flour, and therefore he decided to move to a different area. The next one was a balloon office cube. This was again applied on Robert Farr. This case, he actually had an office, so it required a lot of balloons. So we observed that there was many balloons that happened in this case to actually fill a full office. When this was applied, many nearby associates heard and saw Robert, I think, wielding 2 scissors in both hands, popping all these balloons and actually get rid of them. One of the next ones is the toilet cube. This is where a simple cubicle area was transformed into a toilet. This was applied on Lauren Boone. So if you know Lauren, this was something that was the associate thinking, what would be a good thing that would match with Lauren? We thought this matched well when we looked back and talked with Lauren about what happened. This was where the whole cubicle, again, had large pieces that all symbolized a toilet. In the middle, we also observed a large party tub, which is multiple gallons of water, were also inside that, which required the associate to move it. Next one, again, is on Leihan again. This one was on a cloud cube. We noticed where an office was changed into where it had many clouds actually suspended there because Lei was actually responsible for the cloud platform. So all these clouds existed. And of course, with any environment, you have to have the flames of production at the bottom right below those occurring. This next one actually happened to Cornel.
Oh yeah, that was mine. So after getting back from my sabbatical, I see this, what was my new cube, with all kinds of well wishes and welcome back messages, some of which were probably not borderline work appropriate, but they were in a different language, so they were okay. What happened is the structure was sturdy enough that I actually lived in it for about a week because it was strongly built.
Yes, and then also that had that nice doorway to enter.
Yes.
And inside, I also believe there was many balloons as well.
Yes.
The next one we have here is the Outhouse Cube. This was something we also noticed that was special about it, is that materials used for the Outhouse Cube looked like to be reused from the shack.
Yes.
So similar wood, now is based off the grain and color of the wood used, but this was applied on Scott Buckles. Those who may know Scott actually, I think, used the Outhouse Cube for quite a bit because he wanted privacy to do his work. And what better privacy than an outhouse? So that was a sampling of pranks that we noticed for the past 12 years. And that included, out of 32 pranks, I believe, that were documented. So when it came with pranks, we noticed that there was an important piece that resonated each time. One was that when we saw these pranks applied, our teams that had pranks, they built this very strong level of group stories. They all could recall when that one time their cubicle turned into a large toilet. There was new forms of creativity. Each one that I showed you was different in some form. How can a new prank be actually created that's different from the ones in the past? How can we reuse the materials we have? How can we apply this prank within 1 hour at the end of the day so that it doesn't look like we just work on pranks all the time? There was fun surprises. Each one of those welcomed an associate back. Every time an associate left for a long period of time, we noticed these pranks were being applied. So when the associate returned, it was a surprise of, I never expected that my cubicle could ever look like this, or that a rat trap could be actually wired into a cube. Also, they all had elements of humor. So we all like hearing things, seeing things that are funny. Many of them, just from the aesthetics alone, were funny. But also when you talk to the associate, they couldn't help to laugh about when they saw the prank occur. And all of them had elements that we noticed too, were people working together on it. Very few cases I think we found in any documentation was that any one of these was applied single-handedly. They all required people to work together, to build a story, and work on something that actually applied and remembered someone, like an associate returning. So that is the end of our talk. We want to have some time for questions, but we also have a prize. 3 prizes, that is.
3 prizes.
So, we have what we are called annoyatrons. Some of you may know what an annoyatron is. It's a very simple way to start pranks if you want to. It's in a device that's magnetic that you actually can, it's very hard to notice, but you can place an area and it plays a very high-pitched noise at different intervals of time. You think that there's a battery dead in a fire alarm or something like that. So we have 3 of those to give away. So if you want, please tweet something to the Power of Pranks at Cerner DevCon. We're going to assess those, and tomorrow we'll be giving out the ones that we see are the funniest or the best tweets that we saw. So please tweet something. You could win an Annoyatron and start applying pranks today on your teams. Are there any, I know it's a large area, but are there any questions? We may have a minute or 2 left. If you don't have a question, or you have a question you'd like to actually ask us in a private scenario, we'll be available up here after the talk. Otherwise, please leave us only positive and strong feedback. All other feedback we don't care about. That's a joke. Any honest feedback. So thank you very much.
Thank you.